there is always an exceptions in a social groups. Always an exceptions. You see, that's what prove the rule actually. And what's great about the country we live now, again, I say a couple words about where I was born and raised in Soviet Union. We definitely live in the best country in the world, again. I know it's something is not right here, not right there, and the politicians do this, and the corruption there and here. But the biggest thing, which is a true democracy in our great USA, it's social groups can be changed. That's the whole thing. Yeah, and this is a very important part. Yeah, if someone has a determination, again, desire, willpower, discipline, they can do it in this country, because there is a lot of free education. If some talented young man can move somewhere at will, it's actually remind a little bit ancient China, when the whole village, if they see some kind of bright kid, they put money together to educate this kid. Then the kid went to the government exam system. A lot of times win. Actually, Confucius was the same way. He was from a very poor family, and he really was climbing to the highest level of education and intellect. And we absolutely can do it. There is always an exceptions. The social groups could be changed, but in different countries, if someone who travel overseas, especially France, England, it's practically impossible. It's a caste system, and to move from one caste to another, impossible. From one social group to another one. Here in the States, absolutely. I repeat again, determination, willpower. If person wants to learn, wants to do something, wants to get more education, in this our country, it's absolutely possible. So there's no really excuses here. Okay, great. So now I'd like to see what our senior congregation member Greg Mercurio will say about refined education. What's the difference between any system of different levels of education? Please, Greg.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I went to a university that was actually founded before the United States was a country. And they were always impressing upon us this ideal of education. And the idea was it didn't matter what you studied, that there was intrinsic value in education regardless of your field of study. And actually it was considered impolite or crude to even tie the idea of that education to future commercial success. And this philosophy kind of came from the early model of colleges that existed in the beginning of the United States and a little bit before the country actually founded. And those colleges were primarily to educate the clergy and the upper crust of society. And the idea was to produce Christian gentlemen of refinement and moral character. And the people were also there to make social connections to other leaders in the communities. And these people, when they graduated, would go back to their towns and would take over the family businesses and become community leaders for society. The difference then was that only 1% of the people in the United States ever attended college. All men also. We've now taken that model and tried to expand it to the masses. Whereas today, even though with increasing costs of universities, about 2/3 of the people who graduate from high school attend college. And the problem with this is that the college model was never intended to get people ready for business or commercial success. And so what you have now is people come out of college and almost 50% of them are underemployed or unemployed for the first decade or more. And even the people who are lucky enough to get employment are working in jobs that were never considered college-educated jobs. So people are in retail business, they're in the service industry, their low-level management in manufacturing and trucking and things like that. Doesn't come with no cost either. There's a tremendous amount of debt for people coming out of college. $10,000, $20,000, $200,000 in debt to start a career where you may not even have a job or you'll be underemployed. And the country now has $1.5 trillion of debt. So clearly the system is broken.
System enforcing utopian ideas because they really don't know what to do, how to get out from this situation. What Lao Tzu said again, we're coming back to this again as his words. The reason it is difficult for the people to live in peace is because of too much knowledge. Or, translated, too much unnecessary information. Certain social groups happy with what they have. And when communicator is someone who trying actually to educate us in a certain levels. And we are all recipients. Actually, when communicator try to put some information on people who don't want it, don't need it, they will never use it. I was born and raised in Soviet Union. And when I was 7 years old, my mother worked it was a big hospital from Ministry of Railroads. So it's a huge hospital, well, with a couple thousand people of support personnel was there. And they built 5 stories, small house just for the doctors. So it was maybe, there's 80, 90 families of doctors who lived in this kind of 5-story building where I met my teacher, my beloved Master Tai. And around us, it was still 1954, 55, it still were remains of the war of bombing. Germans really bombed these areas of Moscow very good. It was still burned houses. It's in the late 60s they kind of finished rebuild the destroyed Moscow building basically. And it was the barracks. In the barracks lived the people who work in the hospitals as aid, nurses, cooks, cleaning people, etc. It was amazing difference. And that time at school, I was already first grade, second grade in school. I was going to school with these kids. And once in a while, they invite me to the place. What is a barrack? It's a big building with a corridor. On one side of this corridor was the room. It was a commune apartment, actually. And sometimes it's just family, 4, 5, 6 people lived in one room and one bathroom in a corner. It was incredibly different how actually lived people in our doctor buildings and in those barracks. I spent a lot of time with my teacher at that time, and he has a luxury, he has a little balcony. And over the balcony from this 4th floor, we could observe what's going on. We saw the drunk people constantly. The people were slept on the floors. It was constantly fighting, yelling, screaming. And when you walked in our little yard of the doctor buildings, it was absolutely quiet paradise. At that time, my mom was a prominent doctor, and we still live in a commune apartment, but now it's only one neighbor, my mom, my father, me, sister, and a Dr. Zaslavsky in a one room with her child, her husband, and she. We lived like 11 years together. Everything was absolutely nicely and in peace. We had a tea with each other. We were really, and when we eventually, when I was already 17 years old, we moved to another area, and we got our little, like 2-3 room apartments. They constantly invite us for dinner. We invited them for dinner. Everything was fine, and that was an idea of this actually educated people. Some doctors, because they were educated from Tsar Academy of Medicine. There were incredible manners. That's what's very important, manners and upbringing. And then when I could come to my pal actually from class, walk to the barracks, when I constantly heard screamings, yellings, drunk people walk. At that time, drugs wasn't popular, but Soviet Union is really, the people, drunkards was all over. It was unbelievable difference, which you can see, watch it. And around six, like I said, 6, 7 years old, the everything was cemented. And the kids, these children who were raised in these barracks, they accept their values as it is. That's how that's supposed to be. Sometimes they walk in our doctor's yard, they call it, and said, "Oh, it's so quiet. Well, what is that?" They couldn't really understand it. The moment you get out from our yard and go to barracks area, it's like Sodom and Gomorrah. It was amazing. That's what my master actually he had. That's little flowers in his balcony. He was pouring it, pointed, and said, "Common people, common people." And if I try to explain what's going on, why you always like my pal was really that like second grade. Why he's always screaming? He said, well, "What do you mean? That's how I talk." In our doctor's building, we were friends with some girl, Irene, and her grandmother walked out, and she started to scream, "Oh, grandmother, grandmother, you coming to the yard?" And I remember actually the grandmother said, and then walked to us and said, "Why are you screaming, Irene? It's not polite. Well, speak quietly. You have to act like a lady." So people in our doctor's building, children, were raised actually to keep the door for a lady. They actually always to ask, "How are you, sir? How's your day today?" Anyway, it was absolutely incredible difference between with the let's call people who lived in the barracks. And again, I would say, I can't say who is better, who is worst. That's what set of values was accepted among doctors, and that was set of values was accepted among common people. And as long as they really don't mix, because it's impossible, everybody lived in peace. And that's what's happening again, what teachers said. That's again, I repeat it again. The reason it's difficult for people to live in peace is because too much knowledge. And where we're trying to force this unnecessary information about actually to people who don't want it, don't need it really, this information, they're getting angry. They're getting absolutely angry. You all probably remember our old friend Mike. Mike the Irishman, we call him, from Southie, South Boston. He was and he is my great friend, helped me very much in the beginning of my immigration. I love Michael. But he's a simple kid from South Boston. I remember when this horror thing happened with the Chechens in Boston, with the bombing. You all remember that. Well, I said, that's what people who follow Islam. It's the Muslims. They follow jihad, holy war. And Mike looked at me and said, "Oh, the Muslims, the Chechens Muslims." And I said, kind of a little bit aggravation, "Mike, don't you know that of course they're Muslims, And then he got very angry at me. He said, What should I know about those Muslims or Islam or jihad?" He said, I'm a Southie guy. I pay my taxes, you know what? I go to pub. I'm okay with this, I don't have to. And then I look at him, I said, "Mikey, I apologize. You're absolutely correct. You don't have to know the Chechens, the Muslims. You absolutely shouldn't know what is jihad. It's not your life." That was a great actual lesson for me about educate my friend Mike from South Boston. Master Rick, tell us about the Conan Doyle and about unnecessary information which we could have in our heads and which we'll never use. Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Grandmaster. Arthur Conan Doyle's infamous brilliant detective Sherlock Holmes spoke about the limits of human knowledge and practical knowledge, and the fact that human memory is limited in capacity. In the famous story A Study in Scarlet, Watson chastises Holmes about his ignorance of the solar system and the Copernican theory that the Earth revolves around the sun. And Holmes says to him, "What the deuce is the solar system to me? You say that we go around the sun. If we went around the moon, it would not make a bit of difference to me or my work. I shall do my best to forget it," he promised. And then Holmes had the brilliant analogy that a man's brain was like a small empty attic. And it was a mistake to think that this little room had elastic walls, that it had an unlimited capacity. And Holmes stated that for every addition of knowledge that you add into this room, you basically push something out and you forget something that you knew before. And in a later story, The 5 Orange Pips, he basically says that a man should keep his little brain attic stocked only with the furniture that he is likely to use. So the idea of this is that we have to fill our brain with knowledge that's practical for us, that's useful for us, that's interesting and stimulating for us. And everybody has different interests and different limits to what they can understand and to what's interesting and stimulating for them. And to try and force education on people that they're not interested in or they don't have the capacity to understand is just doomed to failure.
Thank you, Master Rick. Thank you so much. That's great. It's all come back again to the beginning, from 0 to 6, child development, upbringing. Again, upbringing. It's more than just the manners. Why actually what that's Greg was talking about, refined education. It's not only just the manners, it's not only just the way we were talking. It's actually learning from age 0, discipline of behavior. That's the whole thing. I'm coming again to my experience with the barracks. All these children who basically was raised in the barracks, from the beginning, what they will see drunk people, screaming and yelling, fights all the time. They see basically people who wasn't tolerant to each other at all. And that's what they got again. In age 6, when their character was cemented, they believed that's how they're supposed to act, and they act like this all their life. It's so important to bring discipline from this crucial period from 0 to 6 to the child. And the manners, what is a manners? It's a discipline. You sit on the table, you don't start your meal before older people started first. You hold fork and knife, as an art of conversation. As a matter of fact, that's interesting. When I was in France, I talked to an old lady, and she said, "Wow, it's dinner should be like at least hour and a half, 2 hours." I said, "Oh, Miss Jenny, why?" And she said, "Well, because the dinner design, you're sitting with the friends and you're talking about different things. And you're eating, you're talking. Yeah, you're cutting your pieces of meat with the little pieces. So you chew slowly and you talk. You talk, you communicate. That's what you're having a glass of wine and you're having your meal and you enjoying this dinner. And it goes 1 hour, 2 hours. And that's why you have to eat slowly and have an art of conversation. So the all little things, I remember again, we walked from our building with my mom, and of course I let you in, and then it's actually some girl was running here. But I just left the door, and door automatically closed. And my mom immediately said, "What are you doing?" Well, I said, did you see this girl was coming? I said, yeah. I said, but she was like 5 meters away. And my mom said, couldn't you wait another 30 seconds and hold the door for her? That's how I was training. So it's all come back again to the idea of how to restrain our emotions. I'm in a hurry, I don't want to hold the door. No, I have to hold the door. I restrain my initial emotion, run away from this place as fast as possible. No, how to act during the conversation. Don't interrupt other people again. For instance, all these things, it's not a small things. It's a very, very important things. And again, when social groups actually goes to intercept each other, it's practically impossible to communicate. Because one person grabbed a piece of meat and just chew it like a caveman. And it's fine, because it's totally accepted in his social group. Another person who just raised with another social group, holds fork and knife and think, what's going on? So, and again, we don't say which is good or what is bad. That's what got used to. Our model is a nature. We really don't know what's right, what's wrong. That's why Lao Tzu always talking about humanity and justice, futility of these principles. We have only one model, is a nature. And we can see in the nature, animals live with yeah, there is a predators, there is basically who they hunt, but they live in a great harmony in the jungle or in the woods. That's the model which we have. And we should follow this model. Like a giraffe lives with giraffes, lions with lions, rabbits with rabbits. Rabbit doesn't come to rhinoceros and say, hey, let's be friends. They just basically, it's a different. Can we say who is better or worst? Is antelope or hyena? Yeah, is a wild dog or a buffalo bull? You know, it's a no. Everybody it's a little piece in a mosaic of life, in a mosaic of world, but they coexist over there, and that's what our role model. Most people, again, they're happy with some kind of basic education. And they don't really need anything extras. Again, let's say my school. I'm not good in physics, mathematics, for instance, or biology. I was very, very interested in literature, philosophy, art. That was my main of interest. But it was forceful education. I have to pass exams. I spent hours and hours. And then was a high mathematics and the biology again and the chemistry. And I barely remember what is that now. Kind of very, very basic idea. But those hours and years which I spent doing getting totally unnecessary information, I could enhance myself in what I really loved. Again, history, the music, the art. That's my Hunt problem, my prenatal energy just gave me curiosity about that. So that was kind of forceful education. That's why I call it forceful, when you still have to do it. You know, but that was accepted in society, and that's what you have to do in reality. It was a great conversation between one so-called revolutionary and his father. The revolutionary gentleman was a young man who supposed to turn all world upside down. And in his conversation with his father, he said, well, we'll educate peasants. Yeah, we'll teach them to read and write, and then we'll give them the house. Every peasant will have his own house, two cows, 2 horses. By reading Shakespeare and Hegel, they'll learn so much, and we're all going to live in peace. And his father looked at him and said, well, it all sounds terrific, but did you ask them Do they want it? That was a great line. Literati, for all these hundreds and thousands of years, and intellectual elite take a lot of responsibility for so-called poor souls who they want to educate and enlighten. Forgetting to ask them, do they need it? Do they want it? Do they want to change it? And over the history we know, again, I'm coming back. In our USA, it's basically very easy. But in old times, it was difficult, very hard, but still possible to change the social group. But most of elements of certain social groups, they don't need it, and they don't really even want it. So there is some kind of basic idea of groups, different groups, and there is a major groups and a smaller groups. And I'd love to hear again from our old congregation member Mark Gerardo. Tell us, Mark, a little bit about the bell curve and about the groups of educational group and how different groups interpret and accept information. Please, Mark.
Okay, well, we've been talking a lot about the various influences that affect how people are willing to accept information whether they want it, but basically what I'm going to talk about a little bit is the bell curve statistical analysis, and really it implies what is the raw material people have to work with. In statistical sciences, the bell curve is kind of the foundation of statistical analysis. And statistics, for all intents and purposes, in our physical world is the science of reality. In the sense that everything that is made, everything you wear, your clothes to your cars, your computer chips, your drugs, anything that's mass produced, it isn't really real, or it can't be done until statistical analysis says that it's basically true. I mean, we look at COVID right now, and you hear about all these drug trials that the various vaccinations were going through where they had needed 30,000, 50,000 people. And that was all to get a valid sample size so that statistical analysis would be able to tell us with accuracy whether these vaccinations were real. And basically what the bell curve tells us is that if we try to measure a given variable, for instance, the efficacy of the vaccine, that we'll have a large enough sample size if the overall results distribute themselves in a bell curve. And that's what we see on here. So now, for the sake of our discussion today, we're talking about the raw material people bring to the table when, Lao Tzu was saying, don't teach the masses. What are their capabilities to even learn? At the base level, not even their motivation or desire. What are the base level? Now, what the bell curve tells us is that the top of the bell curve basically delineates to this side is 50% of a given sample, to this side is 50% of the given sample. All right, we're going to say IQ, for lack of a better word, intelligence quotient. And I know the baggage that brings along, but for the sake of discussion, this is going to represent IQ where 0 is over here and the high end is over here. Well, what the bell curve tells us is that at one standard deviation, 84.1% of the population falls to the left of that. Okay? So that means that 84.1% of the population has an IQ lower than this point. Okay, and so what does that imply? Well, this is that first standard deviation. And what it shows is that about approximately an IQ of 115 is where that 84.1% position is. So that means 84.1% of the people have less than a 115 IQ. In other words, intellectual processing power, meaning only 15.9% have greater than that. And here we go. Here is from this, if we look at this diagram, it says the mean of college graduate is 112 to 115. The average IQ of your medical doctors, your lawyers, your PhDs is approximately here, which is probably around 128. Okay? And your average IQ of your Ivy League universities up here, somewhere around 141. That 115 is just to the left of where they say bright but not gifted. Okay, that means 84.1% of the people out there organically at birth are less than bright. So what do you expect you can teach them? Especially, and this is not qualifying them as good people or, good hearts or anything like that. It's just the intellectual capacity of an individual. I mean, 84.1% of the people fall below bright. And that's just the science of it. This isn't making a judgment again about the quality of the person. It's just their capacity to process knowledge. How many of these really bright people don't have access to at least Western knowledge? And of course, we're being somewhat, what's the word, subjective as far as our knowledge being of any value. But these people might be in very isolated populations in different parts of the world. So what is their access to knowledge? Then what is their physical health? Because I remember Grandmaster a long time ago, you gave a lecture on Saturday and go, yeah, try to deal with intellectual philosophical principles when you have back pain. So when you're in pain and you're physically suffering, your ability to process information is limited. Now let's ask about the mental health of a given individual. We know there's plenty of geniuses out there, we've all heard about it, that are, really have their own serious psychological or psychiatric problems. So the number of people out there, we talk about the 15.9%, but the number of people that really have the capacity and the overall, constitution to process knowledge is very limited. So why do we think, or as Lao Tzu, he innately understood this, that there just aren't many people out there that can appreciate nor process this knowledge? I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. And frankly, that's all there is to it. Thank you. I cede the floor.
It's interesting, Grandmaster. When I graduated college, the professor who was the keynote speaker, he talked about the graduates. And he said that PhD graduates were educated and master level candidates were learned, and 4-year bachelor degree students were simply well informed.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Rick.